I wanted to take just a minute today to share a few words about my friend and colleague. I'll call him Allan Taylor. He was not a colleague in the sense that we worked at the same place, but did work in the same space, that is, doing Sunday school training Sunday school workers to teach and go about their work more effectively. And to say that I was devastated the other night when I got the message that my friend Allan had gone to be with the Lord is quite an understatement. In fact, I saw it on Facebook and I just handed my phone to my wife and just said, "Read this." And then a few minutes later, it's posted something like, "I'm in shock, in tears, no words." And his wife, Linda, shared on Facebook that they were looking for some people to share some words. And so I just truthfully wanted to uh, share together some of my memories about Allan. I knew about Allan long before I knew Allan. As I say, we worked in the same space, training Sunday school workers. I would guess 9 out of 10 of the churches I've been in, it may be 99 out of 100, had Allan in their church before they had me. And I would often ask, who have you had in your church to do Sunday school work before? I've trained your Sunday school teachers before. And what were they like? And they would nearly always say Allan Taylor, and he was wonderful. Nobody ever said he was okay, it was so-so, or something like that. They said he was amazing. We loved having Allan here. And it's always interesting to think about what people say about you when you aren't in the room. And I'll tell you what people said about Allan when Allan was not in the room. And that is without exception. They said he was a wonderful person, a wonderful speaker. I considered him to be the best of the best in doing the work that he and I did. I don't actually remember the first time I met Allan. I guess it was a case where he was at a event where he was the main speaker and I was speaking at a breakout group. But somewhere along the line, I got his number. And then if I remember right, somewhere along the line, I was doing a meeting in North Georgia and was flying out of Atlanta, in south of Atlanta. And my wife was with me, and I thought, just on a lark, let me just call him or text him and see if he happens to have lunch or available for a dinner. And so we had a little bit of time, and so I texted him. And I said, "This is Josh Hunt," because I didn't assume he would know who I was. And I said, "Happen to be driving through Atlanta here in a bit. I was going to see if we could break bread together." And it's one of the things I appreciate about Allan in discipleship world. They use this acrostic of FAT: faithful, available, and teachable. And Allan showed himself to me to be available that night because he cleared out his schedule. He and Linda cleared out their schedule so they could join us for supper that night. And if I remember right, that was the first time we spent any time together personally, kind of first time to get to know each other on a personal basis. We shared the stage a number of times, and that was always a little bit intimidating to me, but he never made me feel intimidated. He worked at a church fully 10 times the size of the church that I worked at, but he never made me feel small. He was always encouraging and uplifting. He was fun to be around. He was intelligent. He was smart. He was strategic. I think if my wife and I were going on a vacation somewhere and we could pick some couple to go with us somewhere, it might be he and his wife, Linda, that we would choose. They were just fun to be with. Allan confronted me once, a time when I needed, and when most people won't. He and I did a meeting together, and I was in charge of some logistics. Me and another guy were in charge of some logistics, and I thought the other guy was going to handle some things, and he no doubt thought I was going to handle some things. And some logistical issues about travel and whatnot fell through the cracks. And we went to the meeting, and Allan didn't say anything about it. But the next Monday morning, I got a firmly worded email from Allan, and I'll tell you again, I needed it. And Scripture says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. And Allan told me in no uncertain words, you did this and you didn't do this, and I felt this way, and I needed this and didn't get it, and so on. And I deeply apologized to him, and he promptly replied that all was forgotten and it never came up again. And I've so appreciated that. And in my experience, it's so rare that someone would love you enough to point out your mistakes so that you can be a better person. And I would say I have forever been a better person because of that moment. He helped me once in a very personal way. He was hosting a meeting there at First Baptist Woodstock, and I believe having ministers of education from all over the state, maybe all over the South, to come into his church. And he thought that this would be a good networking opportunity for me, that if I would come to this meeting, he said, "Josh, if you'd come to this meeting, you'd meet some people, and they'd get to know you, and they'll have you in their church and do conferences and so on." I said, "Allan, I'm not a member of a big church. I'm not on staff at a big church where I got a big budget to go and do these kinds of things." And I forget now the details of it, but I believe it was, he said, "If you got miles, you can if you get out here, you can stay in my home and come to this meeting. I think it'd be a good thing for you to do." And I'll never forget that gracious offer to stay at his house, and of course, gracious also on his on his wife Linda's part, because if she is anything like my wife, and I think she is, that is, she keeps a pretty clean house, and I probably wouldn't even notice that it needed to be clean, but probably did some extra work to get ready for me to be there that weekend, and he helped me in a very practical way. Two more things I want to say about Allan. Next one is that the more you got to know him, the more Allan was just Allan. He was just very real. The same Allan you read in his books, the things you read in his books, the thing you saw on the stage. The public Allan was very much the private Allan. I remember one meeting we did together, and we came in on a Friday night, and our host came and picked us up, and we drove to the hotel and shared a meal together. And he drove us around town to look at the church, and then we went to our hotel to get a night's sleep. Got up in the morning, had breakfast, shared the stage during most of the day that day till mid-afternoon. And I believe this was in, I think, Oxford, Mississippi. That is northeast Mississippi, essentially a suburb of Memphis. And we had the same plane leaving Memphis. So we're on the same plane going from Memphis to Dallas, and then he would fly to Atlanta, and I would fly to El Paso and on home from there. And as it turns out, the flight that both of us were on was canceled. And I can tell you I've done a fair bit of flying in my day, and people can get a little bit grumpy on a plane. I remember this a little bit off topic, but I remember one time being in Dallas. And this is back in the day when the Eagle flight was a prop plane, and they would actually take you on a shuttle out on the tarmac, and then you would walk up on the stairs to the plane. And anyway, we got on the shuttle and went out to the plane, and then there was a delay, and it was kind of hot that day, and we stayed out there for a few minutes, and then came back, and they said there had been a delay and some trouble and whatnot. I remember, never forget seeing this one guy just ranting and raving and going on and complaining to that gate agent, and I've seen that happen a million times, but not Allan this night. They came and they told us that the flight was going to be canceled, and we were going to have to spend the night in Memphis. And it's like, well, this is the way that things happen sometime. And my point is this: the same Allan that you see on the stage is the same Allan that you would see when he's even in a situation that could cause some people to be a little grumpy. And we went and shared another meal together, and got a night's hotel, and got up the next morning and shared breakfast together. And we made the best of it. And when I think of Allan, I think of him smiling. He was optimistic. He was helpful. He was full of life, even when your plane was canceled. And the last thing I want to share about him was what I think was his secret to success, his secret to his power, to the power to live the life of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness that I saw in Allan as I had the opportunity to work with him on a number of occasions. And that is one meeting we did in Charlotte. And he was talking about the importance of consistency. And I never remember, I remember he and I both had come in late that Friday night, the night before, and I was a little tired and grumpy. And I can tell you, I got up that morning and I had no intention of having a quiet time. I had no intention of starting my day with my Bible in my lap and reading the Word and spending time in prayer. And I was a little convicted when in his message, Allan talked about the fact that even though he had gotten in late, and even though it had been a long day of travel, and even though he was tired, he got up that morning and spent time alone with God in prayer in the Word. And I believe this was the secret. This was the secret to Allan's success. That it was not just his talent, but it was time alone with God. And it was the Spirit of God that Allan allowed to live in and through him. And I will always treasure the times I got to spend with Allan. And I pray that God would be with Linda and his family and his kids and grandkids and all that loved him as they grieve this loss during this difficult time.